I'm very happy to introduce and present Dr. Emiliano de Cristofaro. Emiliano de Cristofaro is a senior lecturer, equivalent to associate professor in University College London in the UK, just after Brexit happened, so no problem, I have.
Are you guys hiring?
Sure, yeah. Prior to joining University College London, he was research scientist at Xerox PARC, and he got his PhD in University of California, Irvine. He will be talking today about privacy-preserving information sharing, tools and applications, and go ahead, and thanks for coming and talking about your research topics. Thank you, Emiliano.
Molt bé. Thank you.
Benvingut.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction, and thanks everybody for being here. So I thought today I will, skip the talk and talk about Brexit instead. Seems like popular. No, I'm kidding. So I just want to actually give an overview of some of my research that I have been doing, first during my PhD and then after. And I'd really like to keep the talk interactive, so please interrupt me at any time. I really try to give an overview of both the building blocks for what I'm going to define as privacy-preserving information sharing, and also applications. So if you're interested in a bit more details about the tools or the applications, please interrupt me. I can go a little bit more deep. All right, so just getting started. My background is really on privacy technology. So I have an applied cryptography background, and I started working in this area a few years ago now, and generically in the area of privacy enhancing technologies or PETs, right? Which usually are an important tool in our systems, and maybe for in certain aspects also in our society, that are deployed to address some privacy threats, right? So you want to protect personally identifiable information, support anonymity, or enable some sort of privacy respecting data processing, right? So usually they're there to respond to a threat, right? So your privacy is in danger, and we come and help you out, okay? But from my point of view, I also see privacy as an enabler. So I'm particularly interested in scenarios, computational scenarios that would be impossible. So applications that you can't really have unless you have some clear, provable, hopefully, privacy guarantees, right? So this is not. So it's kind of like the other way around, right? So it's not that you have already an application and maybe there is some privacy problem and you try to patch it. I actually want to design new ones, right? Okay, so and this kind of started the idea, during my PhD of this concept of sharing information with privacy, which kind of in a nutshell arises when you have two or more parties that don't really trust each other, right? Or they can't trust each other because of some policy or some legislation or anything like that. And so, but they still might want to, or they may be required to share information with each other. Okay, I'm going to give a couple of examples in a little bit. Okay, so the idea is how to support this information sharing in such a way that only the required minimum information gets disclosed in the process. Okay, so think examples as you have two different countries that have information about financial fraud, and they can't technically share information with each other, okay, unless one country gets invaded by the other in an electronical point of view. They can't really share this information, but it may be beneficial, right? So you may be able to fight financial fraud better and more effectively if you were to share information. So these kind of privacy and confidentiality properties, don't allow you to do so, but if we enable privacy by design, we may be able to. Okay. So, I mean, this is not really a completely new idea, right? So, since the 80s, we have the concept of secure computation that cryptographers have proposed. So, very generic kind of tool. You have, a function f, whatever that function is, that you want to evaluate over, to jointly evaluate over inputs belonging to different parties. Right? The classic example is Alice and Bob. And you want to do it in such a way that Alice and Bob only learn the output of the function. Okay? So the classic example is, I don't know, you want to learn who, let's say what is the salary, I mean, who between Alice and Bob earns more, but you don't want to reveal the exact figures of salaries. So, you can have this comparison function. And you want to do it, as I said, in such a way that you only learn the output of the function. So Alice on Bob, right? It's a bet. Okay? So, one way to do it is to, pay a trusted third party. You give them your input. So Alice gives this input A, Bob gives B, and the trusted third party computes the function for them and, doesn't reveal anything else other than the output, right? And so now the goal of the cryptographers from the 80s was to support exactly the same concept without actually the trusted third party, right? So I now trust the cryptography, which I can prove to be secure, and I can actually prove that the execution of the cryptographic protocol doesn't reveal anything more than what it would be revealed by a fully trusted third party, okay? So now this kind of way of designing graphically this thing with arrows going in and out of that box really just simply means inputs and outputs to the cryptographic protocol. Okay, so you have a function there in the middle, FAB, and so that's a protocol that you want to evaluate securely. So the inputs to the protocols are A and B, coming respectively from Alice and Bob, and the output of the protocol is just a function. Okay, so this is a visual way to see that Bob doesn't learn anything about A that he cannot learn from the output of the function f evaluated on A and B. Okay, so this has been, as I said, around since the 80s, and now in the past maybe few years, there's been a renewed interest in making these protocols maybe more efficiently. And but in general, that's as I said, they can support a very generic. They can support the evaluation of any function that you can express as a Boolean circuit. So very powerful, right? So in terms of information sharing, it's not really clear how to map information sharing as a function, right? So that's really was my first challenge as a PhD student. Then of course efficiency is always there. And also, if you look at this slide, right, I'm telling you this protocol doesn't reveal anything other than the output of the function. But what does it actually mean, right? So, for instance, I told you Bob doesn't learn anything about A, but, maybe just by looking at f of A, B, he can infer a lot from A. So, we need a way to kind of quantify, understand the information disclosure from the output of the function. Okay. So, I kind of, during my PhD, I took a step back and I thought, okay, instead of trying to solve all problems with a generic tool, maybe I can I can look at specific tools that solve specific problems, right? Maybe less elegant, but maybe more effective, okay? So one of these tools was private set intersection. So again, it's a cryptographic protocol. Now, instead of having Alice and Bob, I have two things that I call server and client. And, in input, they have a set, okay? Whatever, items might be numbers, identifiers, strings, records, whatever, okay? So now I want to evaluate the intersection between these two sets in such a way that the server learns nothing at all, and the client learns the intersection of the two sets, right? So again, I'm using this visual representation to show inputs and outputs to the cryptographic protocol. So there is no trusted third party in that blue box. There is only a cryptographic protocol that I'm going to be that I'm proving to be secure. Okay, so server and client input their sets. Server gets no output. Well, okay, and the client gets the set intersection. Okay, so then there's a number of variants that you can consider to this protocol. So one is what I call private set intersection with data transfer, where now instead of having just simple sets, I actually have something that maybe looks a little bit more like a database. So have some sort of identifier and a data record that is possibly long, right? Now, when I compute the intersection, I want to retrieve, transfer, depending on if you're the server or the client. I want to retrieve the data record associated with items in the set. Okay, so again, I have in input a set from the client side, and now I have this kind of more complicated set from the server side. And if these items in C set have an intersection with items in the S set, I get the items along with this associated record. Okay? Right, so and then I can simply transform this into something that looks like a database query. So I cannot do complicated queries just as a kind of black box reduction. But I can do like disjunctive queries. Okay, so I can organize the database into attributes and values, so rows and columns, and then I can actually do the same thing. I can actually evaluate these queries in a conjunctive way. Okay, so there is immediate transformation from this to this. And that's pretty powerful, right? Now I can actually execute queries on this database without revealing what I'm querying. And if I'm the client, and if I'm the server, I can be guaranteed that the client will not learn anything else other than the output of the queries. Okay, so the database may be sensitive, the queries of the client may be sensitive, and now I can guarantee that I only disclose the minimum required amount of information. So going back to my example, I want to find, for instance, fraudsters, people that have been, like let's say financial transactions that have been deemed to be fraudulent. So I have a database of, let's say, individuals that are known to be fraudsters. And so I have their social security number on the client side, and I want to look them up into a database of financial transactions. Now I can guarantee that only information about fraudsters is revealed from the server side, and the server and also the client doesn't reveal any information about the fraudsters themselves. Okay, so now again, as I said, there's a number of kind of extensions, different details about these protocols. So one is essentially looks at a fundamental flaw, if you will, about private set intersection protocols, which is that the privacy here sort of conflicts with accountability in the sense that we guarantee the server is guaranteed that the client only gets the set intersection here, but I mean, how do we know what the client is actually inputting into this protocol, right? So going back to kind of a set representation of this protocol, I mean, if the client were to input the universe, right? So the set of all possible items in this kind of problem, then it will just learn the actual set from the server. Like the intersection between the universe and the set is obviously that set, right? So what if the client, now going to maybe a specific application, so what if the client tries to populate a set with its best guesses, trying to violate privacy from the server, right? I mean, the protocol is still secure from a cryptographic point of view. Right? I can prove that the client only gets the intersection, but this doesn't tell me anything about what is the actual input to the protocol, right? So cryptographic protocols, especially in what is called the semi-honest or honest but curious setting, assume that, the parties don't, artificially manipulate their inputs. And that's, in reality, that's a bit of a stretch, right, in certain cases, right? So, we need to somewhat trust this to work. Right, so, in order to alleviate this problem, we came up with the idea of authorized private set intersection, right? So we want to make sure that the client is authorized to input, to populate this set C. And then, everything else is good. But the problem is that now authorization also conflicts with privacy, right? So if I were to prove to you that I was authorized to input some item, it probably means that I'm revealing those items, right? And that kind of conflicts with our initial privacy goals, okay? So we need something a bit clever here. So we need to have these authorizations that, issued by some appropriate authority. So there needs to be someone who tells you, yes, you're authorized, right? But it's dependent on the application. But the important thing is that the verification should happen implicitly. Right, so the server should be able to verify this authorization without really understanding what it's verifying. Okay, so it's sort of a zero knowledge verification here for those of you who are maybe familiar with the concept. Okay, and that's was a really clever kind of set of tools that we worked on. Okay, so next variant again. Tries to alleviate one problem for these protocols, okay? So this comes from the fact that I somewhat lied to you in the beginning, because I told you that, when I do the private set intersection protocol, the server has no output, right? So there is no arrow coming out of this box that goes toward the server. But in reality, the server, just by interacting with the client, is going to learn how many items are in client set. Okay. This is, again, comes from cryptography. Actually, the Bible of cryptography for us is, the Goldrake's book, Foundations of Cryptography. It actually tells you that in secure computation, inputs of all parties are always revealed to each other. Okay. So, here, if you look, we have W items in server set and V items in client set. Okay. These W and V are mutually known. Okay, that's actually what cryptographers tell us from the 80s. And then from a kind of a proof point of view, you say, okay, then I don't care. This is just comes from the fact that when you interact, this is revealed. But again, in practice, this may be a problem, right? So especially for, let's say, for the client, right? So he's doing these queries, or he's trying to get this information, and we have these awesome privacy guarantees, but you don't want to reveal how many items you have in a set in certain applications. So, for instance, part of my PhD was funded by IARPA, which is the intelligence research agency in the US. So at that time, they wanted to look into these protocols to have interagency collaboration, right? So in the US, for instance, I'm sure you know FBI and CIA, right? So they belong to different departments. Like FBI is, DOJ, Department of Justice organizations in response to, kind of federal authority. CIA is a military organization, right? So they're not supposed to reveal data with each other. They don't like each other, okay? So they wanted to use these tools to actually, make sure that if they had information about suspect terrorists, they would not, miss it, okay? So there was this kind of running example in our project that 9/11 could have been avoided if, FBI and CIA had put together information they had about, the Saudi terrorists, okay? So they wanted to avoid this, and, again, they said, okay, maybe we can use these tools to do this privacy preserving information sharing. So here the privacy is not of the people, is really more a confidentiality of FBI and CIA data. But nonetheless, okay. So the problem is that even just disclosing, let's say, how many people you have on let's say a list of suspect terrorists it's not good for them. It's not good enough for them. And if you think about it, it's not just the size, but also how much it grows or shrinks, right? I don't think that list suspector is goes down ever, only goes up. But even like how fast it grows, that may be a problem, right? So one possible thing that you can try to do is to say, okay, I just add some random information, so I pad my set so that it's always, it always has at least, 1 billion entries, right? So that's really a waste of computation. These protocols, I'm going to tell you that they're super fast and they're great, but they're still a script, all right? So it's not that, they're not that fast, okay? And also the problem is that, especially in a dynamic setting, you don't know what is going to be in the future, right? So you have to do a very conservative estimates, like orders of magnitude higher. And again, you still reveal an upper bound, okay? Plus, that if you can write a paper and, solve an open problem, so it's all good, right? Okay, so we want to avoid this concept that sizes are revealed, and we actually did, right? So we have a protocol that doesn't hide both size sets, but it only hides the client's size, okay? So how to do both is still an open problem. If anybody wants to work on it, let me know. Right. So then, there is a number of other things that I did during my PhD and a little bit less. So just added some sort of references if you're interested and want to read the papers. There is code. There is a number of things that we did. Okay. Oh no, I actually want to give an overview of how these things can be instantiated, right? And again, if you want more details, I'm happy to spend more time. But I want to show you let's say the breakthrough, if I can say, where it comes from. Okay, it comes from a cryptographic tool called oblivious pseudorandom function. Okay, so how many of you know what is a pseudorandom function, PRF? Okay, well, I say everybody, right? So it has this deterministic function that takes an input, a seed, a private seed, K, and an input X, and it's evaluated on an input X, and has a couple of properties. One of which, the most important one, is that the output of the function is indistinguishable from random, usually under some computational assumptions. Okay, so if you don't, if you're not following, please stop. Okay, so now I want to build a two-party computation, a distributed computation of this function, where one party inputs K, right, and one party inputs X, right. And I want to evaluate the function fk of x in such a way that the client that has inputted x learns fk of x but not k, and the other party doesn't learn anything, so it doesn't learn x and doesn't learn fk of x. Okay, so again, if I had a trusted third party, then I wouldn't be here, right? So you just give the inputs to this party. It's going to evaluate the function for you, and okay, we just have to trust it. But we want to build a protocol that does this. Okay, so I think I do have a slide that gives an overview of how to do this. But first, I want to show kind of a maybe slightly simplistic black box reduction from this OPRF construction to private set intersection. Okay. So, and the idea is as follows. So let's say I have this protocol, black box, that gives me OPRF. Now I can engage, so the client can engage in multiple parallel instances of the OPRF, and in such a way that is going to get fk of ci for each item ci in client set. Okay. So and remember now. The client doesn't learn k, even if I do multiple iterations, and the server doesn't learn ci. Okay, so now if I have this, I actually solve the problem, right? Because the way I do it is that now the server, will evaluate the OPRF, the PRF. Now it's no longer oblivious for him. is going to evaluate the function over its own items as j, right? So for each j. And now, this, as I said at the beginning, a couple of minutes ago, this function is deterministic, right? So if Ci equals Sj, then Fk of Ci equals Fk of Sj. So I can match, right? I can find matches. And so, I can, if the client will learn that Ci is in the intersection if, you match this PRF outputs. But otherwise, I don't learn anything else, right? So if Sj is not in the intersection, then Fk of Sj is indistinguishable from random, right? And so this is actually was the first way that we could do these protocols. We can build these protocols with a linear complexity. So what you have here, let's say the client has V items, you have V OPRF instantiations, and then you have, if the server has W items, you have W PRF evaluations on the server side. So it's linear in the size of the inputs. Okay, so if you use if you use other tools like including secure computation, you're gonna get a quadratic complexity. Okay, which is not good. Right. So now here is the overview. I hope you don't get scared from this slide of how you can build an OPRF. There's many ways to do it. And in the past couple of years, new ways have come out. But probably the simplest way is to do it based on blind RSA signatures. Okay, so is it safe to assume that everybody knows what an RSA signature is, right? So you have a public and a private key. You hash a value x, and then you compute the exponentiate to the power of d and mod n, and this is your RSA signature, right? So now I consider a PRF to be this animal here, fd of x. So instead of k now in the PRF, I'm using d, the private RSA key, and I say the hash of a signature is a PRF. Okay, I'm a little bit simplifying certain things, but in the random oracle model, this is true. Okay, so a hash of an RSA signature is a PRF. And now I can build an oblivious PRF, so a two-party computation of this PRF, just using a blind RSA protocol. So this was actually, one of the first privacy protocols. David Chaum in the 80s introduced it for eCache, right? So you just, it's very simple. If you want to get a signature from a server that has the RSA key without revealing what is signing, so that's why it's called blind RSA. You hash it, you multiply by a random RSA, a random value r, exponent to the power of e, which is the public RSA key, and so this is equivalent to an RSA encryption, right? So doesn't reveal anything about x. Okay. Now you do the blind signature, and then you can unblind very easily, and then you apply the hash function. Okay, so as I said, there is some couple details that I'm leaving out if you were to prove this kind of formally, but this is kind of an overview of how to do it. Okay, and it's actually it's pretty fast if you think about it. From the client side, especially, there is only one exponentiation, which usually in cryptography, the exponentiations are bottleneck, but e is usually a very small exponent, right? So you can pick it to be even 3 in certain cases. So, these are very fast. And from the server side, well, this is not cheap, but, you would assume the server to be powerful. And also, this can be sped up using something called Chinese Remainder theorem. Okay, anyway. Okay, so now I also told you about APSI, this authorized private set intersection. So I want to show you how to implement that too. Okay, so as I said, there is some kind of maybe court or some authority that is going to certify, to authorize client sets. So, the idea is that if you don't have this authorization, you cannot, nothing is going to work. Okay? So the idea now is very simple. I'm going to make sure that the client will get the intersection, but only if is inputting a valid authorization, okay? But now this verification of whether or not the authorization is valid should be implicit. This should not reveal any information about client set to the server, otherwise that defeats the purpose. So I can modify the OPRF with something that I called implicit signature verification, okay? So now instead of inputting X for the OPRF, I need to input a signature on X. So the signature comes from this authority that is, validating inputs. Okay. So and now I can demonstrate that when I run this protocol, the client is going to get the PRF evaluation on X if and only if he's inputting a valid signature on X, and otherwise it gets some random junk. Okay, so the verification here is implicit because again the server has no output, doesn't learn anything about what the client is inputting, but it's guaranteed by my proof that unless he's inputting a valid signature, is not getting anything. Okay, and so again just an overview. Here is how I build this function. So again, signatures are RSA signatures, and the PRF has this form. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the details unless you're interested, but I just want to give you the overview. So what happens is that the server at some point is going to essentially do an RSA signature verification, right? It's going to exponentiate something to the power of E, which if you're inputting a valid signature, means that you have something to the D, and that D and E cancel out, if you remember from RSA. Otherwise, this corresponds to an RSA encryption, so everything gets messed up, and the client cannot recover anything sensible. Okay, so this is just kind of an overview. Okay, so all these protocols that I talked about so far are all proven secure in so-called honest but curious or semi-honest model. Okay, means that the parties do not deviate from the protocol that you specify, but they try to learn things passively. Okay, so in order to provide active security, in other words, security against malicious adversaries, you need to make sure that if parties deviate from the protocol, then you can actually you catch that. And this actually can be done. This protocol's the cool thing is that this can be done by adding some zero knowledge proofs. Okay, so we had to adapt the protocol a little bit, change the protocols actually a little bit, but we could do it efficiently again. So you still have a bit more computation, but the complexity is still linear, and there's no heavy machinery. It's just short exponentiations. Okay. All right. Okay. So any questions about these tools, or I'm happy also to talk offline. So other building blocks that I worked on include some other protocols. I'm happy to tell me about. But in the last 15 minutes or so, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit more about the applications of these things, right? So I gave you some examples, that came mostly from my funder, right? The people that paid for my PhD. But I want to tell you a little bit what I've done after that. Okay, so now we have these tools. How are we going to use it? So one interesting thing that I got myself into is computational genomics. Okay, so this comes from the fact that genome sequencing is becoming cheaper and cheaper, faster and faster. So the first human genome was sequenced after 13 years and billions of dollars in investments. It took really a big effort, and after that things are really started to progress pretty fast. So we went from billions of dollars to about $1,000. So we dropped several orders of magnitude. So really now you can sequence a genome for less than $1,000. Sequencing a human genome means getting a sample of DNA and determining all the DNA letters that compose it, right? So, this A, T, G, C, from 1 to 3 billion, okay? There is about 3 billion letters in a genome, okay? So why is this a big deal, right? So this means that, if I sequence the whole genome, I can now run algorithms on it, right? So I have data rather than doing expensive stuff in the lab. And this essentially means that researchers can gain better understanding of diseases and their relationship with genetic features, right? So, the fact that you may carry a genetic mutation, so that instead of having A in a specific place, you have a T, might cause predisposition to things like cancer, Alzheimer's, and so on, okay? But, this also means that we were able to identify important, like rare genetic variants, as well as designing drugs or, adjusting treatment tailored to the specific genetic makeup of a patient, okay? And so, we have all, this money that's going into this thing. Really, it's a very important, I think in the 21st century will be remembered as, the genomic revolution century. And this is something that actually, it's not happening only, in our research labs or, these, doctors or geneticists getting grants, right? This is something that is getting into our society. And so I chose to put this Time magazine cover because, it was really, if you remember, a couple of years ago, Angelina Jolie, decided to undergo double mastectomy and hysterectomy because she carries a genetic mutation that is linked to very high predisposition to breast and ovarian cancer, right? So, now this sparkle also an increased interest for, just regular people to have access to genetic testing. And this is happening as, costs are going down. In fact, there are some companies that are called direct to consumer. So they directly market genetic testing to consumers without the involvement of, some geneticists or doctors. So just go on their website, you buy a service for £100 or so, and you get a kit, you deliver a saliva sample, you mail it to them, and after a couple of days you have access to a website that gives you reports of genetic tests. So there is some, maybe not so interesting things like whether or not you turn red if you drink alcohol, or if you're right-handed or left-handed. Okay, you probably know, but there are important things that people are interested to, even though we're not really sure just what it means to, like, for instance, disease predisposition. Just by looking at a statistical test doesn't really mean much without considering, let's say, environmental causes. But anyway, so this is something that, especially in the US, is really hot. They have more than 1 million customers. Okay? So you get all this information, and there's also people, again, especially in the US, they're curious to learn about their genetic ancestry, see where their ancestors came from. Okay, so this is all cool and stuff, but the problem is that human genomes are really, really sensitive from a privacy point of view. So first of all, they're unique identifier. So by design, your human genome is unique. So, if you try to anonymize genomic data, you're out of luck, and even though people have tried, but, it's very hard. Also, if I get a hold of your genomic information, I can learn things that I will not learn by just looking at your maybe health records or just by looking at you. And, this advances fears of discrimination, like in the workplace, for healthcare, health insurance in countries that have private health insurance, and so on. And from a data perspective, it's kind of interesting the fact that once this information is leaked, there is absolutely no way to recover from it. Like you cannot issue yourself a new genome, right? And also the fact that things are. If you get a hold of my genome, maybe even 50 years from now, I might not really care, right? I'm maybe not around anymore, but my kids will, right? And still, my genome and my kids' genome are almost identical, right? So, I actually started looking into these problems, and, there is a number of, if you're interested, I can point you to some very interesting papers, including mine, that kind of analyze the privacy challenges here. Okay, so now, how do the tools that I presented before can help address some of these concerns, right? So, in a sense, a genetic test can be looked at as some information sharing, right? So on the one hand, let's say you have an individual that has an input his genome and wants to allow a doctor or a clinician to run a test, right? So he has let's say, function or something, right? So you want to do it in such a way that, again, you only disclose the minimum required amount of information. And, this actually goes both ways. On the one hand, you don't want to disclose your genome, and on the other hand, you don't want to, or maybe can't, disclose the test specifics. This is confidential information, proprietary information. And there's, a couple of years ago, there was a very interesting court case in the US when one of these big pharmaceutical companies tried to patent a test. I tried to say, okay, I'm going to patent this test, and the US Supreme Court told them, you can't patent a test when the test is whether or not you have a mutation. It's like patenting a human genome. You can't. Right? So you have to keep these things confidential if that's your business model. Right? Okay. So, actually, we had one of probably the first paper and a number of papers after that looked at this kind of secure genomics using cryptography, right? So I'm just going to show you maybe the stupidest example, but that's the fastest one. So if you want to do a paternity test, right? So now you have two individuals that have their genome sequenced now. It's in a file. It's a pretty large file, right? So you want to do a paternity test, and you want to do it in a privacy-preserving way, okay? Like, indulge me a little bit why you want to do this in privacy-preserving way, but this is just an example, okay? So the way to do it is, to compare these two genomes and, check on whether or not they satisfy certain things, okay? So one way to do it is to use something called RFLP, which essentially has some enzymes, uses some enzyme that are going to cut the genomes in certain parts and then extract some of them, again, using some chemical process. Right? So this, now we want to move from the lab setting, from the in vitro setting, to an in silico computational setting. But we can do it, we know how to write algorithms that simulate what happens in the lab. Right? This enzyme process is essentially a pattern matching thing. Okay, so now I have these segments, and in a test that's actually admissible in court, you will say that an individual is another individual's father if 24 out of 25 of the segments have the same length. Okay, so here I only have 2, but imagine I have 25 segments. I just have to measure them and see how many of them have the same length. Well, again, this is if I don't want to reveal what these segments are and how long they are, I can use a number of cryptographic tools. For instance, like this private set intersection cardinality, which is yet another variant of private set intersection, which looks at, how many items you have in common, but not which ones, like in a regular set intersection protocol. Okay? And this I can do it in a privacy-preserving way. There's actually other ways to do it. I just wanted to show you maybe the easiest example to explain. Right? So if we can't do the easiest, really, paternity test is the easiest genetic test. So if we can't do that, we have no hope to do anything else. So, in general, as I said, I'm going to look at genetic testing as an information sharing problem or a function evaluation problem, and I can do it in a number of ways. Again, using this visual thing, I can make sure that, let's say a doctor and an individual or two individuals or two doctors interact in such a way that only the genetic test result is disclosed. Right? And so we have been doing a lot of work, again, using some of the cryptographic protocols, including those that I've mentioned in the first part of the talk, to support a number of things like paternity, but also ancestry testing. Things like looking for disease predisposition, compatibility testing for partners, and so on. Okay. So there's a number of open problems which I'm going to talk about before wrapping up. So one thing is that encryption by itself might not solve all our problems in genomics, right? So if I encrypt a genome and I give it to you without giving you the key, the decryption key, I can assume that you will not be able to open it, right? But the encryption tools that are available today, we cannot guarantee their security past 30 to 50 years. So let's say what is considered standard, very secure encryption, military-grade encryption, as they say, is an AES with 256 bit key, right? Still, we never guaranteed security past 50 years. Either because there could be an attack or maybe a quantum computer comes around, I don't know. But definitely we can assume that in 50 years you may be able to brute force a 256 bit key, for instance, right? So just by looking at encryption, maybe it's not a big problem. And again, as I said at the beginning, in 50 years maybe I don't care that you get a hold of my genome, but my kids will, right? Also, of course, cryptography introduces like reliability or availability issues, introduces like efficiency, overhead. We had to make a lot of data representation assumptions, and one of the problems is that genome sequencing is progressing really fast, but still the machines make sequencing errors. We're talking about 3 billion letters. So sometimes they misread a letter, they delete one letter, they add one letter, and if you don't have cryptography and you operate in the clear text, it's much easier to recover from these errors. If you're doing it over encrypted data, that's maybe a bit harder. Okay, so on the one hand, it's cheaper to sequence stuff, but it's cheaper when you have, let's say, you don't guarantee very high accuracy in the sequencing, just maybe on some areas, right? But okay. And also, as usual, when we want to deploy these things with users, it's always hard to explain to them what are the privacy problems, how we address the privacy problems. We have to ask them maybe to store a cryptographic key or, choose a very strong password that they cannot forget and they cannot write down. And so that's always a bit of a challenge, okay? So, you will see if you work in privacy, I would say with our paper, a whole community started, and there's, hundreds of papers published in this topic. But, there's some fundamental problems that I'm a bit pessimistic that we can actually solve, okay? Okay, so I had a couple of other examples that I don't have time to cover. I really miscalculated. Oh, sorry. Miscalculated the time that I would take. But yeah, so I had this kind of cool thing that I ruined now, where I wanted to have an open discussion about what is the road ahead. What are the open challenges for this kind of concept of information sharing and the privacy implications thereof. So, I will really be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Regarding the problem with cryptography possibly being broken in 30 or 50 years,
yeah.
There is a possible solution that is to use unconditionally secure cryptography.
Yes. That's definitely an option. And this is what we will advocate in terms of encryption for, like, let's say, storage purposes, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem becomes when you try to do privacy preserving testing. So essentially, you try to compute over encrypted data. We know how to do it, and we know how to build these protocols, especially efficiently, on crypto systems that are based on some computational assumptions, right? But we don't know how to do it in the information theoretical setting. right? So, I mean, partly it's because we don't have many people working on this from that community, maybe, I don't know. So the cryptography community is almost split in two parts. Some people have never worked on information theoretical security and vice versa, right? Yeah. But anyway, so there is no optimistic, let's say, overlook in terms of efficiency in that setting. But I don't work on information theoretical cryptography, so I wouldn't trust my own view.
Okay, but maybe you can use a combination of
yeah.
Unconditionally secure cryptography for storing the genome, and then decrypt it, work with it, and
yeah, that's true. That's true.
So re-encrypt pieces of it, and then do the computation.
Yes. No, that's true. So that's one way to look at it. And personally, I mean, that's maybe goes outside my personal research interest. But I think that for genetic testing that will actually be used by end users, like in the diagnostic setting, it's going to be, I want to know whether or not you have this mutation. Mm-hmm. I can actually do it on hardware. Okay, so maybe in that setting I don't need to do the full sequence. But I can do it I can sequence specific regions of the genome, and this I can do it right now in using in silico testing. Mm-hmm. So there is a whole new area that is coming where you have this sequencing done in silicon, which is a new thing. So you put a drop of blood on a very small chip. And what happens is that if you match some markers, some ions are released, and the circuit, the chip, can capture this ion and give you the result, right? So in that setting, you just need the result, and you can throw it away, right? You don't need to keep samples, and just storing test results is different than storing the whole thing, right? But yeah. Hmm? Oh, sorry.
I maybe don't know the answer, but
I hope I do.
I hoped. So, what is the trend in lightweight mechanisms for privacy and cryptography? And I'm thinking on, the Internet of Things is coming, and although the Moore's law is saying that we double our computational capacity every year, mm-hmm. but the reality is that in the world, most of the microcontrollers are 8-bit or 16-bit microcontrollers, and mm-hmm. they are driving most of the things that we see around us. Yeah. So what are the trends on enabling privacy and cryptography on super small computers?
So I think there is, I would say, two lines of thought in this area, right? So one is to go the cloud way, right? So you have a dedicated device that is either under your control, or that you actually are paying for as a service, where you sync all the data in a somewhat private way. So either just by protecting privacy in transit, so whenever you sync your data, you encrypt it and while pushing it to the cloud, but then you trust the cloud to have all your data, and now you do computation. You solve you move the problem from the little device to the cloud, right? So now we go back to the older, to the generic settings where computational power is not really a problem, right? So some people are going that way, and they actually, there's this ongoing collaboration also with University of Cambridge, where you actually build something called a data box that it has a little bit more computational power, and it's under your control, and you use it anyway. But the other trend instead is to try to minimize the computation you do on these small devices, And the way to do it, it's very simple in the end. So, I mean, no matter how you can try and optimize the cryptographic operations, there's been some minor breakthrough in things like elliptic curves that give you a better efficiency. Still, these things are expensive if you have to run it on large inputs or many times or stuff, things like that. So the actual effort is to try and reduce the size of the problem, right? So that when you do privacy preserving, information sharing and querying, or in general computation, privacy preserving computation on encrypted data, you try to minimize the size of the problem. So you try to make it so that it's the things that you compute on, they're just a few, right? So, but I would say this is two main ways that people are looking at these things. But yeah, there's of course in the Internet of Things there's a lot of challenges because of computation and yeah.
This is a more general question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about homomorphic encryption being the answer to many of the open problems in a near future?
I guess you mean fully homomorphic encryption, right? Yeah. So, I'm not a big fan. I mean, I think it's great that we're looking at this problem, and we're investing time and effort and money. We're also discovering new crypto systems that can be of independent interest, especially, there is quite a bit of overlap between research on fully homomorphic encryption and post-quantum cryptography, for instance, right? I don't know anything about quantum computing, so I couldn't really quantify what is the risk of NSA or Google actually building a quantum computer that can solve this problem. But anyway, so that's a pretty important area in my opinion. The problem with full homomorphic encryption is that its main application is encrypting everything, shipping it to an untrusted provider, and then asking this provider to compute on this encrypted data, right? So, my main problem is economics, right? I don't really care about how efficient it is, right? So a lot of people work, it takes 6 hours to generate a public key, or ciphertext using full homomorphic encryption is 1 gigabyte. These of course are problems, right? But I trust that people are going to improve it, and maybe they will find some settings so that they can publish where it doesn't matter that much. But the main problem is that let's take a step back and understand why did we go to the cloud, right? We went mostly because of cost reasons, right? So it's cheaper to pay on demand and pay Amazon or Microsoft to run your computational infrastructure than have it in-house, right? But if what you do ends up creating so much overhead that your cost is going to be orders of magnitude than hiring people and doing it yourself and having things in-house, then why do it in the first place? You know what I mean? If privacy is such an important problem, then just do it yourself.
Don't go to the
right?
cloud. Yeah.
Yeah. So and you see like startups and other efforts to have some sort of like in-house clouds for. Maybe I shouldn't say it on tape, but I was one of in a few like funding. Okay, I'll try to be generic. In a few funding panels where I had to just evaluate funding applications, there was a lot of this stuff, and there are things that are being funded by the EU, by NSF in the US, about how to build local clouds for very sensitive settings, like for like legal information or patient data. So, I think things will, of course, it's hard to compete with Amazon and Microsoft, but, we will get there. So you can just do it in-house.
There are no more questions, I guess. So let's thank again our speaker.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
And for this interesting talk and